Today's lesson is about percent of change, and percent of change is a ratio that compares the change in a quantity to the original amount. So we are still going to be using the percent proportion. So let's get started. You see I have my calculator open on the left. You may also have a calculator ready. So when you are finding the percent of increase or decrease, the original amount is always the whole in the percent proportion, and the part is the difference or the change. So remember that part over whole, percent over 100. This is still the same thing. The original amount is always going to be your whole because that's where you start from. And then the change or the difference is going to be the part. So basically we're looking for what percentage of the original amount is the change. So here we go. The first thing you're going to do is find the change. And when you think about finding the change in math, that really means the difference. So we're looking for the difference between two numbers. So remember, the difference is a subtraction problem. And then you also need to determine which is the original amount. And then once you do find that change, sometimes the questions will ask you, is it an increase or a decrease? So you'll just have to look, did the original amount go up or did it go down? And then insert the numbers into the percent proportion. So change or difference on the top, original amount or whole on the bottom. Let's look at this first one. It says the Mitchell family bought a house several years ago for $120,000. This year they sold it for $150,000. Find the percent of increase. So when you see that verbiage, you know right away it's going to be a percent of change problem. So the first thing I have to do is find the difference or the change between $150,000 and $120,000. So that is a subtraction problem. So the change is $30,000. So that goes on the top because it is the difference or the change. The whole, which is where it started from, is going to be 120 because this is going to be a percent of increase. So in other words, the value of their house increased. So the original is going to be 120,000. I'm looking for the percent. Percent's always over 100. So then I'm just going to come over here to my calculator. You can see I already have the 30,000 in there, so I'm just going to say times 100 and then divide it by 120,000. And so it is a 25% increase because the price did go up. So Mercer Middle School had 240 students last year. This year there are 192 students enrolled. Find the percent of change in the number of students. Is this a percent increase or a percent decrease? So when I look at that, it went from 240 to 192. So that is going to be a percent of decrease because that amount did go down. So now we need to find the difference between the two of them because that is the change. So 240 minus 192. So the change is 48. So that's going to be the top number here, or the part. We're looking for the percentage. And then where you started, I started at 240 because that was last year. So that's kind of last year's original number. So that 240 is going to be my original. So I'm just going to clear out here. 45 times 100 divided by 240, and the percent of change is 18.75%. So it's really important that you're able to distinguish what is the original amount because it's always based off of where we started. So let's look at this one. It says the average speed of a winning race car in the Indy 500 are shown in this table. Find the percent of change in the speed from 1995. So here we are, 1995 to 2010. So that would be this. So that is going to be an increase because it went from 128 miles an hour to 162. So the first thing I need to do is find the difference between those two things. So I'm just going to subtract them. And so my change, I'm going to just draw an empty one here. My change is 34 miles per hour, and I started out at 128, and I'm looking for what percent that change is. So what percent is 34 of 128? So there's that is and of again. So I'm going to take 34 times 100 and divide it by 128. And I get, we're just going to round it to 26.6%. So I rounded it, oh, it said to the nearest whole. Well, I got to read my own directions, don't I? So actually it goes to 127%. Says my real estate agent told me that my house had appreciated in value over the last 3 years. So appreciated is a term for something increasing in price. In other words, it's gone from being worth $102,500 to being worth $111,000. What is the percent of increase in my house? So when you see those words like what's the percent of increase, decrease, those are change problems. So you are going to have to do that subtraction. So I'm going to take 111,000 and I'm going to subtract 102,500 because I want to see what the change is. Well, my change was $8,500. My original was the 102,500. That's where I started. So then I'm going to cross multiply, so times 100 divided by 102,500. So it has actually gone up 8.3%. So we'll just round to 8.3%. Let's try another one. So Caroline, an employee of Hollister, bought a sweater originally priced for $55 for $38.50 with her employee discount. What percent off is the discount? So I'm just going to draw myself a blank one here. I am looking for the percent that she gets off because typically when you work for a retail store, they will offer you an employee discount. So the sweater actually started for $55. So I want to make sure that that 55 is my original amount because that's where it started. So I'm going to take 55 minus 38.50. And she received $16.50 off. So I'm going to multiply that times the 100 and divide it by 55. And she actually gets a 30% discount for being an employee of Hollister. So here we're using the same proportion. So the percent proportion, the minute you see a percent in your problem, you can probably just assume that you can use the percent proportion. So remember, percent's always over 100. Percent's over 100. I tend to write the percent one in the second half of the proportion, but it really doesn't matter. They are interchangeable. But here it does say that 64 is being increased. So that means 64 is my original amount because that's the one that is increasing. So I'm going to take 12 times 64 and divide it by 100. And I get 7.68. And it wants the new amount, which means now I have to add that. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. So now I have to add that to my 64. So I'm just going to come over here, add to 64. My new amount is 71.68. So make sure you're reading the directions. Here 136 is decreased. So 136 is my original amount. So I'm just going to take 136 times 35 divided by 100. And I'm going to get 47.6. Since it's a decrease, that's a subtraction problem. But again, I am still, I've got to read the directions and make sure that I'm following the directions all the way through to the end, because it didn't ask for the amount of the decrease. It asked for the new amount after the decrease. So the new amount is 88.4.